Hey, it's Kim. I'm participating in the Papercrafting YouTubers Hop today, with the theme being When Life Gives You Lemons, Make Lemonade. And today I've chosen to work with the March and April kits from Hip Kit Club. These kits are both very similar sort of colour array, very being bright pastel colours, and so I am going to combine them, and I am creating a layout about how, notwithstanding how crappy COVID has been, it wasn't all bad. So I did have a bright side come out of the COVID lockdown process, and I thought it would be a great idea. And that idea of scrapbooking what happened to me that was good during the COVID lockdowns was perfect for the theme that we're scrapbooking in this YouTube hop. So I have cut a 6 by 12 inch piece of paper of that chevron pattern paper, and then a strip of the other pattern paper that had all these great words on it. And I liked the story word that was part of that pattern paper, and so I'm using it as a strip down the middle. Now I spend a bit of time here because I've got all these little pictures of artwork that I've done, and I wasn't sure how to incorporate them on the layout. And then it came to me that I should go with the strip idea, having the story as a strip, the word strip, that if I put a strip of little photos down next to it, that would be a great way to be able to incorporate lots of small photos into this layout. And so I went with that, and I really liked it. So that was perfect. So these photos are all small photos of various artworks that I worked on during the COVID process. So I never did any paintings before New Zealand's first COVID lockdown. And since that time, I have heavily got into art. So I am fussy cutting some more flowers from that pink pattern paper. So some daisies and a little blue flower, and I will cut a second daisy out as well because I'm creating a cluster on this right-hand side of that strip. Now, I've kept this reasonably fast because I ended up having a big break halfway through the development of this layout, and when I came back, I ended up making my clusters quite different. So this is one way that I could have done the cluster on this layout, but I ended up choosing a slightly different way, which you'll see in a few minutes. The base of the layout is largely the same. It remains the same though. So all of these elements are either fussy cut, so a few of the flowers were fussy cut, or there are some die cut flower clusters and branches and little elements, and then there's some of these wooden buttons that come as part of the kit, and there's also some ephemera word phrase pieces that I've also included into that cluster. And my intention is to then include a large title next to the cluster. So pulling out a few more bits because there's lots of great ephemera pieces in these kits. So once I thought I had it at a stage where I liked it, I wanted to add some mixed media to this layout as well. And so I decided to start with some watercolour paints. So I'm just checking which pink I want to use. This is my watercolour set, but I do a lot of real watercolour artwork these days, and this is my giant set of watercolour paints that I have built up. So I'm just putting, and you could use anything here. You could use a pink ink pad, water soluble ink pad, water soluble crayons, pencils, anything to create this pink light. It ends up drying fairly light, pink, soft blur that's going to be underneath the flower cluster. So you don't have to use watercolour paints, or you can use cheaper watercolour paints. It's just the effect that you're after. So I'm using a little bit of paper towel here to mop around the edges just to get a really soft effect when it dries, because I don't want a hard line. So I'm just using the paper towel to dab, and keep that really soft. Checking that the layout is right, I'm happy with that, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry. Now, this is when I had a really big break away from this layout. I've completely changed location because I'm now scrapbooking with a friend out on my kitchen table instead of in my scrap room. And what I have here is a whole pile of die cut leaves, and I thought that would be really nice to incorporate some of these leaves into that flower cluster. So I'm just creating my own colour paint that will coordinate in with my die cut flowers and leaves that I already have. and I am painting these. So the paints that I've used are a selection of Prima paints in blues and greens, and I'm just mixing up bluey green colours. So I've just mixed up a little bit now, mixing up a slightly lighter version, and so I'm painting some in a lighter blue, and then I'm putting some of that lighter blue over the darker blue green. And so it's just a variation of blue green colours into these different leaves and branches that I'm going to then incorporate some of these, not all of them, into the cluster. So I set those aside to dry. I've just used a silicone mixed media mat there that I'm doing the painting on, because then the paint dries and you can just scratch it straight off. So if you're wondering what that was, just using my wet glue, which I use art glitter glue to stick down that chevron paper. I just absolutely love the colours in that. And now I have a torn strip of pale blue pattern paper, which I'm going to stick down, and then my word strip, which sort of started off how this layout was going to come together. And so I'm going to stick that down, and then I am going to, I'm going to add, so I have a large Hexagon Die Cut. Now this die is from Uniquely Creative. I am not sure if you can get it anymore. It is an absolutely gorgeous die. I actually cut it out on a self-adhesive paper. So you can see here that I'm just picking off the end, and then I can just, because it's a very intricate die, using a self-adhesive white paper means that I don't have to add my own wet glue. I can just stick it straight down onto the layout. The good thing about this die too is you can cut it up into different pieces, which I have done, so that I can create that soft hexagon effect. So really it's white over the pale pink or white on white down that left edge, and eventually I will add some, down the right edge, and eventually I will add some down the left edge on the other side of the photo. So I'm going to stick these photos down now, again, just with wet glue straight down onto the layout. Just making sure that they all fit as I put them down. So a couple had a little bit of extra space on the top of them, so I've slid them underneath the photo above it. But now that will go in, and then that's my photo strip down. And this is where I change the cluster. So instead of one large cluster on that right side of the strips, I have one cluster up there, and then I end up putting a smaller cluster on the left side of the strips. And I think that it balances really nicely, because it sort of gives you a diagonal effect across the page, and I think it works really well. So you can see that I'm also including some of the leaves that I painted, so that brighter green colour that's in that cluster are the painted leaves. And now I'm adding some of the Hexagon Die Cut. So this is all from the one die cut. It's very large, but I'm adding some more pieces of that down on the left side of the photo strip. So again, just picking it off the adhesive background. Some of the pieces seem to come off really easily, and some of the pieces are a bit difficult. I just picked these up from actually a stationery warehouse supply thing to get the cheapest that I could. So it's just a lightweight, this particular one is just a lightweight adhesive paper. So here you can see that I'm forming a little cluster on the left-hand side with a rainbow and a little saying and what have you. And I'm going to add some flowers, and some of those green leaves that I painted will go over there as well. And now I am putting my title down. Now, to make sure my title's straight, I'm using a T-square ruler, and I find that an invaluable tool in my scrapbooking process. It did take me a while to think of exactly what I wanted my title to be. And I ended up having COVID wasn't all bad. So there's no doubt COVID was bad, and the lockdowns in New Zealand were pretty fierce. In fact, our first lockdown was 5 weeks, and we weren't able to leave our homes except for very limited exercise and to either attend the doctor or hospital, so medical services, or to pick up groceries. There were no restaurants or takeaways or cafes or anything open during those 5 weeks. And so you had to cook for yourself, and your family. So it was, no takeaway, no restaurants, no going out, no nothing. So it was a pretty fierce lockdown, but it did work at the start of COVID and meant that for much of the COVID 2 years that we've been battling COVID, New Zealand remained less restricted than the rest of the world. So we did have some restrictions, but once we got the first wave of COVID under control, we lived a relatively sheltered existence here in New Zealand until Delta hit our shores. And so COVID was a stressor for us as we, followed what was happening in the rest of the world, but we were rather protected. But COVID lockdowns were also an opportunity for many people to do things that they'd always wanted to do but hadn't got round to. And for me, it was to learn to paint. So this layout documents my learning to paint, firstly with acrylics, then onto watercolours, then into cold wax with oil paints, and then I started art journaling and doing collage work. And to the point now where I have actually some of my abstract watercolour work in a gallery, a local commercial gallery here near me in Timaru, New Zealand, which is very exciting. So I'm just continuing to build these clusters, adding in more little flower sprigs, more of the leaves that I've got until I've built them up exactly how I want them to look. And there's also some little puffy hearts that I'm going to add in, and I've got the buttons as well. So one of the buttons is on the left-hand side and a couple of buttons in the right-hand side cluster. And I've got another little word phrase going in up there. And then I think I am going to start sticking everything down. So I try not to totally dismantle clusters as I stick them down, and it depends sort of how complex they are as to whether I just try and lift and build them. You can see I've had to move this leaf, the second leaf, once I put the rainbow down, but this little cluster is fairly simple, so I pulled it apart to be able to stick it all down, plus some of the pieces like the puffy heart and saying were self-adhesive, so I needed to take the backing off those. So you can see that's pretty well stuck down there. Now I'm just working my array around the various elements in the right-hand side cluster and sticking those down. At least by using wet glue to stick die cut adhesives, it gives you a little bit of time to be able to move things before they're permanently adhered. So I am just now moving each item one at a time and sticking them down so that I don't lose the feel of this cluster, because I really like how it looks and how it's the placement of all the items. So I'm just, as I say, now all of these items have been stuck down just with wet glue. I use no foam tape on this layout at all. You could add foam tape under some of the elements if you want to, but I found that by layering items over each other and the use of the wooden buttons and the puffy sticker elements, that the layout didn't really need to have foam tape added to it. So it means that the finished layout is quite flat to go into your album. So now I've got all the bits stuck down there, I think. Just sticking a few more. There's some puffy stickers with black and white leaves and flowers on it, so I've included some of those as well. And now I'm just adding some torn pieces of a gold, so it's a white washi tape with some gold geometric printing on it. I've had it in my stash for a long time, but I really like adding touches of gold to a layout, so I'm ripping some little bits of this gold washi tape and adding it along the strip in the middle of the layout. Now I'm going to add my journaling, and journaling for this particular layout is really important because that's what the whole layout is about. And so I'm just using a lead pencil here to draw up some lines, and then I'm using a grey pen to write in my journaling. And I've already told you the story behind this layout during this video, and so that's what I'm recording in my journaling. When I run out of lines, I just add some more lines and continue with my journaling. I actually added quite a lot of journaling to this layout because it was important for me to record all of the details. So just going on with that, thinking about what I'm going to write. I really liked how the journaling fit in with the title and that large cluster. I just think it worked really well to be able to record this story. And that's it finished. You will note now seeing these still photos that are actually a friend who I was scrapbooking with, post me finishing the layout, gave me a lemon. And so I made a few little changes to the cluster, and you will see that it fits just above the word story in that strip, and there is actually a lemon there, which I thought was really appropriate considering that this layout was all about turning lemons into lemonade. Thanks for joining me. If you're not a subscriber on my channel, I would love you to join me. Please remember there are a list of links of people participating in this YouTube hop in the description below. If you've liked this video, please press like. Thank you. Bye.